Every year Halloween rolls around, and every year Christians have this internal debate about what our attitude towards it should be. I'm not sure anyone actually ever changes their mind as a result of these debates. I've noticed it seems to be something where people are just really entrenched and nothing you can say really seems to make any difference. But nevertheless, I wanted to put forward some of my thoughts on the issue anyway. So when I was very young, my Christian parents celebrated Halloween, and they allowed me and my siblings to celebrate Halloween as well. I remember one year trick-or-treating when I was very small, dressed as a pirate. I remember one year my sister made us all dress up as joggers for some reason, I don't know why. And the background to that is that my family all came from a fishing town in the northeast of Scotland called Peterhead. I've spoken about this occasionally before. And something about that fishing community in Peterhead was, even though it was largely Christian, there was a lot of superstition up there. Fishing is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, and everybody in that community had lost multiple friends and family members to the sea. And I think the superstition, this is my theory, I think the superstition was a way to try to control the elements and to try to control the unknown. Things that were beyond their control, they tried to control through superstition. So if the fishermen were walking to their boat, if they saw a Christian minister on the way, they had to quickly avoid them because bumping into a Christian minister was considered a bad omen of death. So they'd be jumping behind bushes and going down alleyways. On the first day of spring, they had to greet the first sheep they saw 3 times for some reason. I remember my Christian grandparents were being very superstitious when I was younger, telling me not to walk under ladders or step on cracked pavements. I think my grandma read tea leaves and she looked at her astrology chart. And my mum's aunt, who was not a Christian, was fully involved in witchcraft. So this was the kind of background my parents were born into, surrounded by Christians, but Christians who for some reason didn't see a conflict between their Christian faith and dabbling in a little bit of occultism on the side. They just saw that as a bit of harmless fun. Now, I've told this story before of how when my younger brother was born, he was incredibly ill and naturally speaking should have died. The doctors were sure he was going to die. But my parents around that time then received prophecies that God was going to intervene and heal him. My parents at that time, being Baptists, were not even sure if they believed in prophecies and healing, but because my brother's life was at stake, they decided to go on this journey to go deeper with God. So when I was 8 years old, my parents left the Baptist church that we'd been going to in Aberdeen, and they started going to a Pentecostal church because the pastor of that Pentecostal church had experience of prophecy and healing and so forth. I'm trying to keep the story as short as possible, but through that Pentecostal experience, through that Pentecostal church, my parents then encountered the reality of evil. I think I spoke about this recently in another video a couple of months ago about how there were real encounters with demons at that church. They saw the reality of demons for the first time. There were also local Satanists who tried to intimidate that church. They would slash the tires of the pastor and spray graffiti on the wall and make threats. It turned out that my mum's aunt, also the non-Christian one who'd been involved in the witchcraft, it turned out my mum was named after her, and part of my brother's problems was related to that aunt's witchcraft. There was a demonic spirit from that aunt who was attacking the male babies in my mum's womb. My mum had had a miscarriage before me. When I was born, I didn't breathe at first, and then I had some near-death experiences growing up. I was nearly hit by a bus. I nearly drowned in a pool. And now the demon was going after my brother as well, but that demon was then cast out. We also learned about the significance of high points in an area and how witches and Satanists will try to commandeer the high points in an area. So there's a hill very near to us where occultists had made stone circles out of rocks. My dad would go on a prayer walk up there and he found the stone circle, and then he'd turn all of the rocks into a cross. He'd then go up a little while later and the Satanists would have rearranged it back into a circle, so he'd make it into a cross again. And this went back and forth for some time. And eventually they just gave it up and it just left it as a cross. So the point I'm just trying to make here is that through that journey, we encountered evil and we discovered it's real. Satan is real, demons are real, witches are real. They don't have green faces and they don't fly about on broomsticks, but there are people out there who do try to manipulate and control through occult means. Satanists are real. They exist. Now, it was after encountering the reality of evil that the desire to celebrate Halloween in my family just completely disappeared. As we grew up, my parents explained, look, we're not going to celebrate Halloween anymore, and here's why. Because evil is real, and it's not something to joke about. It's not something to play around with. It's not fun. It's not entertainment. This matters. It's real. At first, I'm not sure if I really understood. When I was 8 years old, I remember going into school one November the 1st, and all my friends were talking about trick-or-treating, and I just felt left out because I hadn't gone. I remember one year my parents handed out Christian materials instead of sweets and chocolates, and I remember the next day at school overhearing some kids saying, "Did you go to that weird house that handed out the Christian materials instead of sweets and chocolates?" And I was cringing inside because that was my house. But as I grew up, it made sense to me that we should not be partaking in this. As I grew up, I began to see the juxtaposition and the hypocrisy in claiming to be a Christian and yet celebrating darkness. That just didn't make sense. After all, as Christians, we know that Satan is real. We know that demons are real. We know that it's through their influence and the power of sin that we now have things in the world like murder, death, witchcraft, evil spirits, occult power, darkness, and horror. That's where these things come from. As Christians, we understand that Jesus came into the world to defeat those things, and to win that fight, it came at great personal cost. To liberate us from these things, he was flogged so hard that he was disfigured to the point he almost didn't look human. He had nails driven through his hands and his feet and died the most agonizing death possible to release us from death and darkness and the powers of hell. Once we understand that, and once we see what it cost our Savior, how can we then celebrate those things? How can we celebrate the very things that Jesus came to defeat? How can we celebrate the darkness that was responsible for Jesus having to go to Calvary? Because that's largely what Halloween's all about. That's what people dress up as. That's what they decorate their houses with. It's a celebration of Satan, evil spirits, murder, death, witchcraft, occult power, darkness, and horror. It's a celebration of everything that Jesus came to save us from. It seems to me that you can only be entertained by darkness, by the darkness of Halloween, if you haven't fully understood the reality of evil yet. Do you remember when Prince Harry went to a fancy dress party dressed as a Nazi? I also remember thinking, if Harry had been in a concentration camp at Auschwitz and had seen the reality of his friends and family being gassed to death, he wouldn't be joking about it and thinking it was something fun and something entertaining. People that were there in Auschwitz don't make light of it. They know the reality. And it's a similar concept. If you haven't really grasped the seriousness of sin and what it cost Jesus to liberate us from sin, you can make light of it and you can dress up as Satan and his evil spirits and death, and you can think it's all a bit of fun. But if you've encountered those things personally and you know they're real, and if you know what it cost Jesus to liberate us from those things, there isn't a part of you that wants to take it lightly or that thinks it's all a bit of fun or that's entertained by it. Halloween's always been a very dark thing. It actually originated with the Celtic people of these islands of the United Kingdom and Ireland, and it originated as a pagan holiday called Samhain. It was a time where the pre-Christian ancient druids, the pagan priests, would try to commune with spirits, engage in occult activities, they would do animal sacrifices, and also the druids were known to do human sacrifices as well. In fact, around this area where I live, there are many ancient stone circles that have been preserved for all these years, all these thousands of years. And the ones in my area are actually unique to here and a part of Ireland as well. And they're trying to figure out what that connection is. But they're called recumbent stone circles. So they have two flanker stones and then a flat one between them, and that's called the recumbent stone. And it creates a kind of frame. And it's believed that when the moon was in that frame, they would carry out their animal and human sacrifices. Human remains have been found in those stone circles. There's also a well up in Burgh Head where they used to do ritual drownings. So Druidism, the religion that spawned Halloween, was a very, very dark thing. They would wear costumes made up of animal heads and skins and try to fortune tell and just engage in occult activities. In fact, in Edinburgh in recent years, they've tried to resurrect all of these old Scottish pagan festivals as they were originally. So in the spring, they do the Beltane Fire Festival, through which the Druids would honour the god Baal or Bel, which is a god specifically warned against in the Bible. God hates the worship of Baal. Worship of Baal in the Old Testament also involved human sacrifice. God hated it. And then on Halloween, they've also tried to resurrect the Samhain festival. In fact, I went to one of these resurrected pagan festivals a few years ago to be part of a Christian outreach team and do some evangelism. And I can honestly say it's one of the darkest things that I've ever witnessed. There were people dressed up as demons and all sorts. A lot of them were half naked. The ones in red are meant to be evil spirits. There was a rumor it was going to end up in an orgy in a big tent. People took their kids to this and the kids were crying and asking to go home. And this is the origin of Halloween by the Druids, by the worshippers of Baal, the ancient Druids. It remains one of the highest holy days in the Satanist calendar. I still personally wouldn't want to go near those stone circles in this area around Halloween. I remember one year there were animals that had been sacrificed. I think it was chickens. But the point I'm just trying to make with all of this is that evil is real. And once you realize that evil is real, it stops being entertaining. It stops being just a bit of fun. I think honestly, that's why some Christians don't really want to give Halloween up, because they're just entertained by it. They think it's a bit of fun. I think that anyone that argues that Halloween is fine for Christians is not really being driven by a desire to honor God. They're not really being driven by the Bible, as much as they might argue they are. I think the bottom line is they just think it's fun. They're just entertained by the darkness. And you can't speak against evil if you're entertained by it. But yeah, once you realize that Satan, evil spirits, the power of darkness, witchcraft, death, occult power, and horror are real, there's really no fun in it at all. As the Bible says, take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. So the question I would ask this Halloween is, how can we, instead of taking part in Halloween as Christians, be a bringer of light into this darkness? How can we, instead of celebrating death along with the rest of the world, how can we celebrate Jesus instead and celebrate the life that he gives?